A microservice by definition should be quite small, but just how small could we make one in Asp.NET Core? Let's smash on that.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Asp.NET Monsters. In today's episode, we're going to be playing some code golf with microservices.
All right, so in the last episode we talked about endpoint routing, and when I was looking at that, it kind of got me thinking about just how small could we make a microservice in Asp.NET Core. So if we had a service, and just as an example here, we'll just envision a service that has to do with storing customer data. So it would have like the usual, get a customer, save a customer kind of concept to it. And how small could we make that? Like, what if we didn't use API controllers? What if we didn't use any of those built-in services? What if it was just endpoint routing and some functions that did the work that we needed to do? So what I've done here is just I started with the empty project template for Asp.NET Core 3. And so it uses routing. And then what I've done is this isn't a complete implementation of it, but I have a customer service here where I just pass it in a database connection string that I get from configuration. And then I tell it to use these endpoints. So I say map a get that matches this route pattern to a method called getCustomer on my customer service. And that's it. Like, I'm just using routing, and that's the only part of Asp.NET Core that I'm using here, and configuration, I suppose. Now these routes, they do still allow us to do pattern things. So I'm saying that this part of the route is going to be an ID and that it's a GUID. So we still get that as part of routing. But we don't get things like model binders. So there's no model binding or anything here that we would get in an API controller. So let's take a look at this customer service and what its implementation looks like. So it just has a constructor that takes in the connection string. And then here there's a getCustomer method that takes in an HTTP context, because that's the only thing that's what endpoint routing expects when we do a map get, is it just passes in an HTTP context, and then it's up to you to do something with that HTTP context. So we open up a connection string, or we create a connection, open it, run a query that just selects the customers using that ID, which again, there's no model binding here, so it's not passed in as like an ID parameter to the method. I have to grab it off the request route values. But I can confidently know at this point that it's a GUID and that it's there because it was defined as part of my route. So I add that as a parameter to my command, I execute it, and then I read the results old school. So I'm doing everything with SQL commands and connections and data readers. I could use something like Dapper here, but I just wanted to demonstrate, not taking any additional dependencies. So this, other than SQL data client, is the one that I had to reference there. But I'm just referencing Asp.NET Core app, and that's it. And then I write out the response using the new JSON serializer that's built in. And this is not like a complete thing. I'm missing things like the content type and the content length and all these headers that we kind of take for granted that get set up for us as when we return a JSON result. But basically, I'm returning that customer serialized as JSON if it's there, and otherwise I return a status code 400. I'll just run this just to show that it is in fact working. I can put a breakpoint here, and I happen to know that I have a customer with this GUID as an ID here, and that through my endpoint routing mapped me over to this method. And if I inspect my context and dig into the request, I should see under my route values, if I expand that, there's my ID and the value. So I'm able to grab that and just step through here and get the results. And then I get my response written out. If I change, so I have status 200, and there's my JSON response. If I change that ID at all, still ends up routing to here, but I should get a 404 response now, which I do. So I'm not convinced that this is a great idea. It was just kind of a thought experiment of how small could I make a microservice without pulling in any extra programming models or concepts or services as part of ASP.NET Core. So what are your initial thoughts, Simon? I didn't say this in advance because I kind of wanted to get your raw opinion on it.
I mean, I don't think you even need line 23 there. I think that automatically, when you execute a read, it automatically opens connections.
That's true if you're using Dapper and you're using their extension methods.
Is that a Dapper thing?
Yeah, that's not true of...
Oh, no way. I always thought that was just like a built-in thing.
Yep.
Well, then. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting concept to kind of deploy the smallest possible thing. I have been on a microservices project where the original architect was very big on the idea of you don't need this, you don't need that, we'll make these things as small as possible. Yeah, so that it did end up biting us a little bit because we avoided things like dependency injection. It turned out that we actually really did need that. And that it made our tests a lot easier and it made our code base a lot cleaner when we kind of added that back in. But I mean, this is a reasonable approach to creating very small services with very few dependencies, and this would be pretty fast to execute. Like you couldn't get it going much faster than what you have here. That being said, I'm perfectly willing to trade a little bit of speed for a little bit of maintainability. In the vast majority of my projects that are not involving high frequency trading.
That's fair. We do still have some form of dependency injection here at least, although I'm not with the service because the service was just created.
Right. I was just using that as an example of something that ended up biting us in the long run.
So things that, as I was going through this, that I realized I was missing that would be nice to have is like I didn't do insert or update and the other parts of this what this customer service would be. And because I don't have model binding and the other parts that come with API controllers, I won't have any validation happening for free with this when we go to do the write operations. So that might be an area of pain, but I kind of feel like there's probably a place where this would make sense. So there's an example right now where I'm doing an integration with a third-party API where I need to expose a public endpoint. That's just it's like a webhook essentially. Like they're supposed to call this endpoint when something happens, and I'd like to deploy it as a standalone thing, and it's literally just one endpoint. I know it's never going to grow into anything bigger than that, so it seems like it would be a good use case for this type of thing.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of scenarios where having something really small like this within your microservice application is useful. I mean, things that I'm thinking of are like a caching service would be really good for something this small because it's very quick and you could build a distributed cache on top of this pretty easily. And then, I don't know, my like always canonical go-to thing for microservices is sending emails that use an endpoint that takes in just like a username or an address and a body, and then handles sending it through whatever SendGrid, Postmark, any of those sorts of things. Then this would be ideal for that.
That's a good example. And so the advantages aren't just that it's faster because you have fewer layers of abstraction that are in play. There's also just that microservice should be really easy to understand because there are no other concepts other than that service and that code that executes when a request comes in. In theory, that's also a big bonus. So
yeah, I agree.
Cool. I hope to maybe write this up as a blog post down the road. So if that does happen, I'll share that in the show notes. But otherwise, that's all I have for today.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching another episode of the ASP.NET Monsters. If you have a microscopic amount of time, you can upvote and share this content, and we'd be highly appreciative.
Thanks.
Bye.